Hey, I've been trying to do my part on this. I've been trying to teach over and over again in books and content, on Instagram, videos, in my courses, why you shouldn't be billing by the hour. But so many creatives are still doing this, and I get why, and we're gonna talk about it here. But this is my next attempt to try and convince you that fixed bid pricing is the way to go for your creative business. Way too many designers are still charging by the hour, and there's some benefits to it occasionally, but most of the time, it is not the way to go. In this video, I'm gonna explain to you why it's a bad idea to help you see the light of fixed bid pricing. But before we dig into that, let's just define these two different things. So hourly billing. Hourly billing is just when you set a rate, set an hourly rate, and then you just count the hours, and then you bill the client by the hour. Fixed bid pricing is when we define the scope of a project, we get all the details in place, and then we set a single price for that engagement, a fixed price. That's the price for this scope. So let's compare the two options, hourly billing versus fixed bid pricing. What are the pros and cons of each? First, let's look at hourly billing, the pros of hourly billing. And like I said, I get it. I get why people do it. There's no scoping for the project. You don't have to know the details. You don't have to scope it. You don't need a detailed contract that says, here's exactly what we're gonna do and exactly what you're gonna pay, so it's easy. There's no scoping necessary. The client can change their mind. The client can add new rounds. They can change their mind on priorities. They can say, oh, you know what, stop working on that, let's start working on this. So they can change their mind as often as they want because you're just counting up the hours. The client can make changes forever. If they want round 175, they can change forever and ever and ever. I think the most I ever did, and I wasn't billing by the hour, but this is one of the very first projects I ever did as a freelance designer. I must have given that client like 20 rounds of logo designs, and some of them were big, like 10 logos, 12 logos for a round, and it was just a nightmare. I didn't know what I was doing. I just kept, thinking, oh, I just got to keep this client happy. So I just went over and over in extra rounds. Don't do that. I wasn't charging by the hour, but that's one of those rare circumstances that it may have protected my downside. So the benefit, again, hourly billing, the client can change their mind and they can make changes and add new rounds of delivery forever. You're just gonna keep adding up the hours. Another benefit that is easier for you is that it's not a high ticket sale. You don't have to go in and sell your client on this thousands of dollar engagement. You don't have to sell them on a $10,000 logo or $20,000 logo. It's an easier sales process. Hey, here's my rate, and I'll just count up the hours and charge you for the hours. So it's an easier sales process for you as the designer. And probably the benefit that hourly billing has, the biggest benefit, is that there's no risk of losing money. You're gonna add up the hours, and whatever it takes, you're gonna invoice to the client. There's no downside risk of you scoping it wrong and then losing money on this engagement. But there are cons to hourly billing. Let's take a look at those. Your revenue is limited to the number of hours in the day. You have 8 hours of work, 10, 16 hours a day that you can be working, and your revenue is limited to the quantity of hours. Even if you hire people and you start having them bill by the hour to your clients, you're still limited to the number of hours that they have available. You can't factor in market value. If everybody else like you is charging $5,000 for a logo, but it takes you 10 hours to design a logo, and you charge your clients $100 an hour, that's $1,000 that you'll charge that client for a logo, but everybody else is charging $5,000. So you're so far below market value, and charging by the hour doesn't allow you to factor in that market value of the work that you're doing. It also doesn't let you factor in the ROI value. And the ROI value is what is the return on investment that this client can get from the work that you're doing. How much revenue is it going to help them generate to their business? And you can factor that in if you're doing fixed bid pricing and not hourly. And then this one is the one that I love the most because it's so obvious. It penalizes you for working quickly. You learn new keystrokes, you learn new techniques that make the work go faster, that help you get to a solution faster for the client, and now you're making less money. The faster you work, the less money you make. No good. Now let's look at the pros and cons of fixed bid pricing. Pro number one, it allows you to use market pricing. If everybody's charging $5,000 for logos, you can charge $5,000 for logos. Even though you're so fast, you can get a logo done in 10 hours. You can still charge $5,000, that market value pricing. It also allows you to factor in ROI value to the client. If you are doing something for the client and it is going to help them generate $1 million of revenue to their business, then you can factor that into your pricing and charge them $10,000, $12,000, $15,000, $100,000 for the thing that you're doing that's going to help them generate revenue for their business. There's no cap on revenue. You're not capped by the number of hours in the day. So there's no limit to what you can make as a designer with fixed bid pricing because it isn't based on hours. And I love this one. It rewards you for working fast. You get better at your craft. You get better at understanding your clients and the audience and design styles, and you get better at manipulating the software to do what you want. Now you're making more and more money because you're working faster, and fixed bid pricing rewards that speed to you. But there are a few cons to fixed bid pricing, so we're not gonna just discount those and say it's the best thing ever. The cons: bad scope, you could lose money. If you don't get all the details in place, you could lose money on the project. Or if you do get all the details in place and you don't adhere to them, you don't hold your client to the agreed upon scope, you could lose money on the project. If you price it too low, you could lose money on the project. So you scope it and you got the scope right, but your price is too low, you could lose money on the project. So you have to get good at scoping and pricing your work if you're going to do fixed bid. And then your sales process has to be built for a high ticket sale, because you're not just trying to sell your client on an hourly rate of $100 an hour or $80 an hour. You're trying to sell them on a $3,000 brochure or a $5,000 logo. So you have to have a high ticket sales process. Okay, let's look at a couple examples of how hourly billing would have played out, or it did play out in this first example, for some of these designs that you've seen in the world. This picture right here is Carolyn Davidson. She is the original designer of the Nike swoosh, which she designed in 1971. And she was a design student at Portland State University, where she met Phil Knight back in 1969. Now, Phil Knight had just founded Blue Ribbon Sports and asked Carolyn to take some projects at $2 per hour, $2 an hour. One of those projects was to create a stripe for the side of a shoe. And that stripe became the Nike logo. These are some of the original designs of Carolyn Davidson's Nike logo, the famous swoosh. I love old pictures like this. I have stuff like this from design school when I went to design school, because it was paste up and pen and ink kind of design back in the day. It wasn't all digital. So I love seeing stuff like this work from Carolyn Davidson. Now, we all know what happened, that the Nike logo blew up and became one of the most recognized brands in the world. But Carolyn Davidson charged Blue Ribbon Sports and Phil Knight 17.5 hours for the logo, which became a $35 design job. $35 for the Nike swoosh. So that's one of the famous examples of somebody charging by the hour for something that had humongous ROI value to the client, but she charged by the hours, and so it was dramatically underpriced. Now, shout out to Nike. In 1983, they gave her stock that was valued at roughly $1 million in stock, and they gave her a diamond ring with a logo on it. So this is back in 1983. That stock over the years, I'm sure, has become massively, massively valuable to her. So shout out to Nike that they would do that. But not all of the clients are gonna try and make it right to the designer. They're just gonna take what you did for the low, low price, billing by the hour, and they're gonna benefit their business from it, not make it right to you. So you can't trust the Nike factor. But I love that Nike did that with Carolyn Davidson. Okay, so that's the detriment of billing by the hour. Now let's look at this logo. This is the British Petroleum logo, designed by Landor Associates in 2008. Now, this logo was one of the most expensive logos ever created. $211 million for this engagement. And it wasn't just the logo. I'm sure it included a ton of strategy and a ton of concepts and full style guide and all of those things. But it doesn't change the fact that it was still $211 million for this British Petroleum logo, which is a staggering amount of money to pay for a logo. Now, if you were gonna do this by the hour at 100 hours, you would have to spend 2,110,000 hours on this engagement, which is 40 hours a week for 1,014 years to be able to accumulate enough hours to charge $211 million. You're never gonna get there. You're never gonna get to these big paydays for your work charging by the hour because there's not 1,014 years of time you can invest into any of these projects. Let's look at another one. The Accenture logo, also designed by Landor and Associates in 2014. And this logo was a $100 million project. And again, I'm sure it included style guides and strategy and all these other things, but it was a $100 million engagement. $100 million at $100 an hour, you would have to work 480 years before you accumulated enough hours to bill $100 million to a client. It's not possible. This one, Postem Norge logo, which is Postem Norge is the Norwegian Postal Service. They designed, or they had somebody design this logo back in 2008. It was a $55 million logo project or branding project that, again, I'm sure included a lot of other things, but the core deliverable was this rebranded logo. 550,000 hours at $100 an hour, 40 hours a week for 264 years before you could bill $55 million. Australia New Zealand Banking Group, redesigned over the course of 2 years, 2010 to 2012, $15 million, $100 an hour for 40 hours a week for 72 years before you hit the $15 million number. So what I'm trying to highlight for you here is that billing by the hour is never gonna get you to these bigger paydays for your work. And now most of us aren't gonna be sitting there thinking, oh, if I could just land a $15 million logo. Man, that's not realistic for most of us. But even getting you from $50 logos to $5,000 logos is going to require you designing work in fixed bid pricing, not billing by the hour. You can't get there billing by the hour. I love this last example here, the London Olympics logo, designed by Wolf Olins in 2007, and this logo was highly scrutinized. And if you're not a design expert, I can just point out to you that this is maybe not the greatest design ever. But we don't know all the details on what those concept meetings were and what kind of guidance the client was forcing upon Wolf and how that all played out. So let's give him the benefit of the doubt, but this logo is not the greatest thing that was ever created, let's all be honest. And it was highly scrutinized and ridiculed when it came out. This was a $625,000 project. 625 grand, which is 6,250 hours at $100 an hour, 40 hours a week for 3 years to create that. If you were billing by the hour, again, you're not gonna get to these bigger numbers billing by the hour. So here's my rule. Every project that can be bid at a fixed price should be. That's the rule. Now, what are the exceptions to that rule? Well, when do we bill by the hour? When is it appropriate to bill by the hour? Here are my rules for that. When the scope is unclear or unknown, you cannot define the scope. If you really can't define the scope, then you can bill by the hour. Next, extra rounds or changes. Let's say you include 3 rounds of revisions inside of your engagement, and then the client goes to round 4, 5, 6, 7. You may just charge them an hourly rate to continue those rounds. It's a simpler addendum to that engagement. Next, minor content updates. Let's say that you designed business cards for a client last year. They come back to you and say, hey, we have a couple of extra names we want to put on business cards. Can you do that for us? You can just charge by the hour for things like that, or content updates to a website or something. Debugging code. This is the one at my agency. We would only debug code by the hour, because you don't know if it's gonna take 2 hours or if it's gonna take 200 hours. So if we had some code that showed up inside of a client site that was buggy, and it was something we launched already and debugged inside of our normal engagement, but something happened after our little tenure of maintenance was over, then we would do it by the hour for that client. But other than that, those are really the only exceptions that I have on when it's okay to bill by the hour. Everything else should be billed by a fixed price. Scope it right, price it right, follow the scope, and hold your client accountable to the scope and the price, and hold yourself accountable to the scope and the price. Okay, I hope that helps. I hope that maybe this is the final version of this content that is gonna make you say, you're right. I can no longer bill by the hour. I'm taking the easy way out, but my income is capped as a result of it. Hope that's what you get out of this video. Thanks a lot. We'll see you again soon.